Today, I'm bringing you a crime film based on real events, one that exposes the brutal reality of fighting drug lords. In Mexico, there are two major cartels, the Reyes cartel and the Mata cartel. The US FBI agent Matt plans to spark a war between them, so once both sides are badly wounded, he can wipe them all out in one move. He first sends Alejandro to pose as a Reyes hitman and gun down Mata's chief lawyer in broad daylight. Mexican media immediately explodes with coverage, insisting it was Reyes who struck at Mata. The very next day, Alejandro disguises himself as a Mata gunman and kidnaps the daughter of Reyes in public. But the reason Matt takes these extreme steps traces back to something that happened just days earlier. In Texas, near the Mexican border, the region had become a playground for drug traffickers and one of the hardest areas to control against illegal crossings. One night, U.S. Border Patrol agents caught more than a dozen immigrants sneaking in, but as they counted heads, one man suddenly dropped to his knees and began to pray. The strange move made everyone pause, but a second later, a deadly explosion ripped through the scene. At the same time, four men entered a crowded supermarket. They split up quickly, and after three massive blasts, chaos erupted. A mother found her daughter and tried to flee, but the last terrorist was blocking the exit. She held her child close and walked slowly toward him, hoping he might lower the bomb in his hands. But the outcome was inevitable. The next day, these two attacks, killing and wounding dozens, dominated the national news cycle. America's Secretary of Defense immediately held a press conference, announcing a special task force had been formed and vowing to track down the masterminds. Days later, at a military base along the US-Mexico border, Matt appeared to interrogate a Somali pirate being held there. This pirate was the key to uncovering who was behind the attacks. After investigation, they discovered all five attackers were from Yemen. Because of American sanctions, Yemenis couldn't travel freely, so they were smuggled in by boat, with Somali pirates providing safe passage. All Matt needed was the name of the man who paid the pirate, and they could trace it back to the one pulling the strings. To break him, Matt ordered a satellite strike on the pirate's villa, then threatened to bomb every home he owned until his family was wiped out. Terrified, the pirate spilled everything. Soon after, Matt called Washington with an update. The attackers were Yemeni militants retaliating against the US, but the money funding them came from none other than Reyes, Mexico's drug kingpin. The next day, Matt was urgently recalled to Washington and brought into the Secretary of Defense's office. With proof that cartels were tied to terrorists, the US decided to launch a deep strike against Reyes. But because America couldn't act openly on Mexican soil, they needed operatives who could move in the shadows. The Secretary promised military support, but stressed that Matt would have to recruit his own men, and if the mission failed, the US government would deny all involvement. Matt got to work. First, he brought in a private military supplier, spending $10 million to arm mercenaries with state-of-the-art gear. Next, he turned to his old partner Alejandro. Alejandro wasn't in it for money, only revenge. Fans of the first Sicario film will remember that Alejandro's wife and daughter were murdered by a cartel boss. He got his vengeance, but the man above that boss was none other than Reyes. Now with a chance to finish the job, Alejandro immediately agreed. Once the team was ready, they moved into Mexico, setting off the chain of events we saw earlier. Alejandro posing as a Mata assassin and kidnapping Reyes' daughter, hoping to pit the two cartels against each other. To make sure Reyes got the message, they spared one of the bodyguards so he could deliver the warning. Alejandro then smuggled the girl across the border into Texas, blindfolded the whole way so she had no idea who her captors really were. The plan seemed airtight, but then came the problem. When Matt later reviewed satellite footage, he saw Mexican police arrive and kill the surviving bodyguard on sight. It was obvious these were corrupt cops on Mata's payroll, which meant Reyes never learned who had taken his daughter. With the plan compromised, Matt had to switch tactics. He ordered Alejandro's team to pose as US police, stage a fake rescue, and deliver the girl to safety. In her eyes, Alejandro suddenly became her savior. Afterward, Matt met with an old friend in Mexico, a man with deep ties on both sides of the law. He asked him to secretly return the girl to a police station under Mata's control, so that when Reyes tried to claim her back, it would trigger a direct clash between the cartels. The friend agreed and arranged everything. Soon, Matt led a convoy of 3 Humvees across the border, escorted by 7 Mexican police trucks for cover, plus drones circling overhead. Everything looked secure, but once they hit a dirt road and the dust choked their view, things took a deadly turn. The police suddenly turned their guns on Matt's convoy. They were all corrupt. The friend had betrayed him. It was unclear who had bought them off, but their goal was obvious: take the girl and shut down the cartel war. Then, a Humvee at the rear was hit by a rocket, throwing the team into chaos. Luckily, the drones above took out the rocket crews. The convoy soldiers dismounted and fought back, exchanging heavy fire with the traitors. In the chaos, the terrified girl bolted from the vehicle and hid underneath. Minutes later, Matt's men gunned down the attackers, but drones detected more forces incoming. They had to abort and retreat to America immediately. When they regrouped at the vehicles, they realized the girl was gone. Matt considered sending men to search, but Alejandro stopped him. He reminded Matt they had just killed uniformed police, and if more Mexican forces arrived, arrived, it would trigger a diplomatic disaster. Reluctantly, Matt agreed and gave Alejandro a tracker, ordering him to find the girl alone. Meanwhile, exhausted and frightened, the girl flagged down a passing car, but fate turned cruel again. The men inside were the rocket team who had fled the ambush. She tried to run but was grabbed. Just then, she heard a familiar voice. She looked up to see Alejandro arriving, the one man still determined to protect her. The two of them got in the car and started heading toward the border, but before long they ran out of gas. With no other choice, they had to continue on foot, though their strength quickly ran out. Luckily, by evening they stumbled across a household where the family kindly took them in. Meanwhile, back in the US, Matt was getting chewed out by his superiors. Even though his team had only fired back in self-defense, there was no way to cover up the deaths of dozens of Mexican police officers. To make sure America stayed out of it, the mission was ordered to end immediately. Matt was frustrated. After risking so much and coming this far, it was all called off with one order. To make things worse, the Secretary of Defense told Matt to go into hiding, and to keep things quiet, both Alejandro and the little girl had to be eliminated, just as planned from the beginning. If the mission failed, someone had to take the fall. The decision left Matt furious, but following orders was his duty, so he had no choice but to accept. Out of personal concern, Matt still called Alejandro on the satellite phone. He told him to kill the girl quickly, then run as far as he could. But after spending days together, Alejandro saw the girl as if she were his own daughter, and he couldn't bring himself to do it. He asked Matt to let the girl live and try to convince his superiors to change the plan, but military orders were absolute, and Matt turned him down instantly. That night, Alejandro made his own decision. He would take the girl back to America because it was the only place she could be safe. Especially now, stuck on the Mexican border, they were at risk of being killed by rival cartels at any moment. The clever girl had already guessed who Alejandro really was, but she didn't blame him. After all, her father had too many enemies. By dawn, Alejandro was leading her toward a small town. They couldn't cross the border legally, but with the help of smugglers working for the cartel, they could sneak into the US. To prepare for the worst, Alejandro slipped the activated tracker into the girl's shoe. He knew both he and the girl were wanted by the Americans, but this was his only chance. If they made it into the US, the government wouldn't dare kill her so easily. At the same time, Matt locked onto the girl's location. His bosses wanted to send a kill team, but Matt volunteered to go himself. He understood Alejandro's plan, and deep down, he had one of his own. After some time, Alejandro and the girl reached a gathering spot. They paid $2,000 for passage and waited for the bus. But during the wait, one of the smugglers' boys recognized Alejandro. Just days earlier, the two had clashed in the US. Alejandro had glared at him and sounded his siren by accident. That moment left an impression, and now the boy suspected Alejandro was a cop. He told the smuggler boss, who quickly surrounded Alejandro and spotted the girl as well. Alejandro warned them, "You're messing with the wrong people. This could start a war." The smuggler didn't care and had Alejandro tied up. Even though the girl insisted Alejandro worked for Reyes, the smuggler decided to kill them both just to be safe. Not long after, the smugglers crossed into US territory with Alejandro tied up. They took him to a desolate desert spot where they often killed people to harden new recruits. The boss picked a young man who had just joined, but the rookie was too scared to shoot. Furious, the boss killed him on the spot. Then he chose the boy who had recognized Alejandro earlier. Shaking with fear, the boy raised the gun, and with one shot, Alejandro collapsed to the ground. The smugglers left with their men, hurrying back to Mexico before sunrise. Later, Matt spotted Alejandro's body through his night vision goggles. His teammates were relieved they didn't have to pull the trigger, but Matt's eyes were filled with anger and sorrow. When they picked up the girl's signal again, Matt gave the order to attack. Meanwhile, the boy who had shot Alejandro was tormented by guilt. He couldn't take it anymore and jumped out of the truck. Ironically, that decision saved his life. A few hours later, Matt's helicopter caught up with the smugglers. They forced the trucks to stop and opened fire on everyone. Even the ones who raised their hands to surrender were gunned down. Strangely though, Matt didn't kill the girl. Instead, he carried her onto the helicopter. He decided to put her in witness protection because after seeing Alejandro die, he could no longer bring himself to kill her. The story could have ended there, but a miracle happened. Alejandro suddenly woke up. He'd only been grazed on the cheek and knocked out. Dragging himself over to the body of the rookie, he used the man's belt to cut himself free, then stumbled away from the scene. As he moved through the desert, he spotted the smuggler's abandoned truck. Inside were only corpses, which told him Matt must have done it. Fearing for the girl, Alejandro searched. But when he didn't find her body, he guessed Matt had protected her. Stealing the truck, Alejandro sped away, determined to survive. Soon, one of the smuggler's backup cars started chasing him. Instead of panicking, Alejandro calmly pulled a grenade, waited for them to get close, and threw it straight into their path. Badly injured, Alejandro kept going until he vanished into the borderlands. A year later, he tracked down the boy who had shot him. The boy instantly recognized Alejandro. Without a word, Alejandro called him into a room and quietly shut the door. And that's where the movie ends. What do you think Alejandro did to the boy? Leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next one.